So that when you talk about love, you're making it a priority to say, America, keep track of the prison industrial complex, keep track of the dilapidated housing, keep track of the disgraceful school systems, keep track of the unemployment rates and underemployment rates and unavailable health care, child care. That is what it means to talk about a black agenda. Now, what does that mean? That means that the black agenda has always been the best agenda for the nation. The best agenda for the nation. You turn to the 4th chapter of the great W.B. Du Bois' 1924 book, The Gift of Black Folk, and he talks about how black people emancipated democracy because we began with a constitution that was a pro-slavery document for 75 years. And we needed to emancipate white supremacist democracy into a multiracial democracy, and same was true with Jim Crow and Jane Crow. So the black agenda has always been the best agenda for the nation because it emancipated democracy, reconstructed freedom so that the least of these would be at the center or near the center of what it means to talk about public interest and common good. And in the age of Obama, there's a lot of confusion. Because to have a black face in a high place easily leads us to forget so many folks stuck in the basement of the house. And we get obsessed with the breaking through at the top, and we forget about the least of these. So we put pressure on our brother, loving pressure, but we already see that any president is under tremendous pressure from the strong, the corporate elites, Wall Street oligarchs, various powerful folk at the top, and can easily push Obama in such a way that he tilts too much toward the strong and doesn't focus the way he ought on the weak, on the poor, on working people. That's why we're here today. And I would want to add this too, that we don't have to ask permission from anybody to talk about black suffering and black social misery. We love who we want to love. And we love other folk whether they love us or not. That's what Martin Luther King was all about.
So that raises, in my mind, Angela Glover Blackwell from Policy Link. Please welcome Angela. That raises, Angela, in my mind, this question. Again, we're going to try to get all these questions out that we've been talking about in the barber shops and beauty salons and all the emails I've been getting from folk all across the country for the last couple of years. We're going to put all this stuff in love on the table today. And one of the questions that we get asked all the time, that I get asked all the time, Tavis, why you just talking? Another conversation. Every year on C-SPAN, you're talking. Negro, you ain't done nothing. You ain't put nothing out. All you're doing is talking. I've heard that from everybody, not everybody, but a lot of folk, as you can imagine, across this country. My answer has been that before Barack Obama was even in the United States Senate, much less running for the White House, these conversations resulted in a document called The Covenant with Black America. And that book laid out a 10-point agenda to which we were going to hold everybody accountable when we got to 2008 who wanted to be president. We didn't know who was going to be in the race. Again, President Obama was not on the national scene. He was not a United States Senator at that time. So it was never about singling out, demonizing, casting aspersion on him or anybody else, because the field had not yet been determined when we came together to put together this covenant with Black America. You were there. Policy Link was instrumental in putting that book together. Let's go back a few years. Again, before we were in the era of Obama, and talk about this covenant with Black America agenda that laid out these 10 issues that mattered most to black folk, and what we were going to do about it, and how we were going to hold folk accountable once we got to 2008. So back me up a few years.
So happy to be here, and so happy that you have asked me about the covenant, because as we're thinking about this question of do we need a black agenda, I want to remind everybody that we have a black agenda. We have a black agenda, and that process of putting together the covenant was so much the way I think it always has to be if you're serious. Whenever my staff says to me, we're going to a meeting, I say, what's the agenda? When they say we're having a meeting, I say let's put together an agenda. And the agenda is the starting point, but just putting together the agenda doesn't solve the problem. You have to really dig down. Each one of the items on the agenda, how are we going to move it forward? What does it mean? What's underneath it? What's going to be the plan? And that's what we did when we put together the Covenant with Black America. We took the big issues like health, but we did a drill down and said, but what will it mean in our communities? How do we deal with the disparities? How do people even get into the situation we're in? What's happening in their environments that's leading to asthma and obesity and heart disease? So we talked about health, and we ended up talking about the absence of grocery stores. So that we developed an agenda and we did a drill down. We did the same thing when we talked about communities, urban communities. What's the urban agenda? It's about more than public housing. We talked about affordable housing and the fact that in America, where you live is a proxy for opportunity. It determines everything, and we explained that. These kinds of issues allowed us to be able to say, we know the areas where we have to focus, and then we looked at the data. Where are we? Where do we need to get to? That gap is what we addressed. How do we fill the gap? And we filled it with policy ideas. We took those policy ideas and we talked not only about what our elected officials needed to do, but we talked about what we needed to do. And so when you talk about an agenda, if all you want to do is put together an agenda, don't show up, because it's a waste of time. You put together an agenda to be able to lead to some change and achieve something. I want to suggest that we have fallen down, because not only did we do, here's the Covenant with Black America, we said, here's the covenant in action. This is how you make it real. And when I go back and I look at the covenant in action, and I think about all the suggestions we made to the country about how we could make it real, we haven't done it. And so not only do I want to see us advance the agenda, I want to see us take it apart, disaggregate all those pieces, and ask, what do we want to hold others accountable for, and what do we want to be held accountable for? Just one thing I want to add, because we've mentioned President Obama. I've spent so much time in Washington working with the new president, and I have been amazed at how in this freeway of access, a freeway of access that brings us tea parties and brings us all kinds of opportunities for people to say whatever they want, he has been able to stay in the progressive lane. He's been able to stay in the progressive lane. And in that progressive lane, I have seen the Covenant with Black America go through each one and be able to check off extraordinary things that are happening because this president gets it. And when I talk about the president getting it, people say, well, what about everything that's not happening? My response is, I can walk and chew gum at the same time. I can be a friendly critic at the same time that I can praise progress that's being made, and we all need to learn to do that. As we go forward in this conversation, I'll add more specificity. But the main point to remember is we have an agenda, but we haven't done our part to realize that agenda.